and I am composer in residence with the HPO. This week, we are joined by HPO cellist Laura Jones. Laura will start off today by playing a Scottish lament called 𝘓𝘓𝘦𝘳. Laura made this arrangement herself, and she will be playing it on the bass viol. This performance is a tribute to people grieving over the recent events in Nova Scotia. So here is 𝘓𝘓𝘦𝘳 performed by Laura Jones. Wow, that was beautiful. Now, Laura will join us back in a moment here. So here we are on Facebook Live, and we have some advanced questions that were submitted from our survey and from Instagram, but please feel free to comment and ask questions as we go. So we saw Laura playing the bass viol here, and we'll hear more about that in just a moment. But at the HPO, she, of course, plays the cello. She actually joined the HPO back in 1989, so she has seen a lot of changes in that time. For those of you who attend some of our community events, you've surely seen Laura. You might have seen her play at a gallery concert or happy hour concert or an event with one of our partners. And on top of that, she also plays educational concerts. And Laura is very dedicated to our organization, both on stage and behind the scenes as an active committee member. So I think she's ready to join us here. Thank you so much, Laura. That was just beautiful. Such a moving tribute. Thank you.
Oh, well, it was very much my pleasure. When you guys asked me to do this, I thought quite a bit about what I would play, and I was thinking about some serious music, 𝘓𝘓𝘓 or something. And then I woke up one morning to the radio to the sounds of Natalie McMaster playing along with one of the girls who had just recorded a little violin thing. I can't remember if she perished herself or her parents perished. And anyway, it struck me so much, and I just thought I would like to play something to acknowledge these terrible things that happened in Nova Scotia. It's such a horrible burden for all of us in Canada to be suffering from. And I remembered that I had made this arrangement last year for a concert that I actually played in Hamilton as part of Bud Roach's Hammer Baroque series with my friends Alison Melville and Meredith Hall. And I thought this seemed like it might be appropriate. And I looked it up, and in fact, it is a lament that Robert Burns himself said was a perfect song for a broken heart. So I thought, well, how could I play anything else, really?
Very, very fitting. Thank you for that. Now, a question for you. You were playing on the bass viol. So how is that different than cello?
Well, it's a completely different family, actually, of instruments from the cello, which is part of the violin family. And these instruments predate the violin family by about 150 years, at least. And they developed from the guitar. So I'll just show you. You can maybe see in the picture here, it has frets. There's frets all down the neck. It's probably easier to see from the front, like a guitar. And it's tuned more similarly to a guitar than to a cello. It has 2 fourths and then a third in the middle, and then another pair of fourths. Whereas the cello has these notes. And it has a low C, which this instrument actually only goes down to a low D.
So I imagine that must be very confusing to play, to switch between the tunings in fifths with the cello to then tunings in fourth, third. Oh my goodness, what a mind bender.
When I first started learning this instrument, yeah, it was very confusing. And technically, it's quite different. There's a lot more chords on a viol, so more like what you'd see a guitar player do with sort of putting your fingers close together to make chords. Whereas in cello, it tends to be much more sort of a melodic one-line instrument. So there were a lot of techniques to learn when I started playing it. But the amazing thing about it, I started in about 2002. So I'd been playing the cello for a long time at that point. When you start an instrument from scratch, even 5 minutes of practicing, you get huge amounts of improvement. So it felt like exponential growth in my ability. Whereas by that point, if I practiced 5 minutes on the cello, you didn't really notice any real incremental difference at all. So that's part of what kept me motivated to keep coming back and practicing the viol, because I could see how fast I was improving. So that was fun.
And one of our watchers here, Pat Dickinson, I think she noticed your bow hold here. And can Laura comment on the various ways to hold the bow when playing cello and double bass? Because it looked like you were playing underhand.
Yes, that is the viol technique of bowing. The viol bow looks quite a bit different than the cello bow as well. I'll just hold it up and see if you can see. As you can see, it's convex as opposed to a cello bow, which is concave. And it's also, the distance between the hair and the stick is quite a bit wider. And what you do is you put your hand in between the hair and the stick, and you can change the tension of the hair of the bow by using your finger. Now, everybody's used to seeing the cello bow, which is held overhand like this. But actually, when people started playing the cello, they held the bow underhand as though it was a viol, probably because most of the people who were playing an instrument held with the legs were viol players to begin with. And so that was how they were comfortable. And it was the violinists who eventually taught us how to hold the bow overhand. So
very interesting. Yeah.
History of that.
Okay. And now we have another question for you. This one was from our survey, which was sent out in advance. And Cindy asks, now to switch towards the cello, can you tell us about the cello you currently use for concerts?
Sure. Well, I have 2 cellos. The cello I play in the HPO is what I call my modern cello. It's fitted with metal strings, as all cellos that you would see in a modern orchestra are fitted. It also has an end pin and various sort of structural differences that support the tension of a metal strings. And then I also have an instrument that I call my Baroque cello, which has gut strings and is built inside a little differently because the tension of gut strings is much less on the instrument. The cello that I play in the HPO is a French cello from 1926. So it's almost 100 years old, and I've had it for the last 22 of its years, approximately. I love it very much. It's by a maker called 𝘓𝘰𝘤𝘩𝘣𝘦, made in Paris. And my Baroque cello is an English cello from London, circa 1820, 1825.
Okay. Now, it's interesting you play both Baroque cello and modern cello, and you mentioned gut strings. Now, what is the difference in playing with gut strings versus modern steel strings? I mean, we last year we had a Bach festival, and we were able to see you perform in the community a fair bit with with a Baroque quartet, basically, people playing on Baroque instruments, which was great. And you were playing on gut strings, and I just remember that you had to keep on tuning because they're hard to keep in tune.
That is one of the principal differences. Because they're a natural material, they're much more sensitive to environmental issues. I mean, I guess metal is technically a natural material as well, but organic, let's say. It's an organic material, and so things like temperature and humidity affect them much as they affect us as people. And they will either tighten or stretch, and possibly not always in the same proportion one string to another, or not in the same proportion one person's instrument to another. So we'd like to tune a lot, as the violist in my period instrument string quartet used to say, as Jimi Hendrix says, we respect your ears. So we tune our gut strings a lot to make sure that they stay in tune.
Okay,
metal
so the modern
strings are more stable.
I get it. Right, right. Now, another question for you from our survey here. Judith asks, what's it like to travel with your instruments, and do you fly with it?
I do fly with my cello. I occasionally play with the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra in Winnipeg, so I've been having to fly out there periodically. I have a special flight case, and I, with my heart and mouth, tend to subject it to the tender mercies of the flight, the baggage carriers of WestJet or Air Canada, and thankfully, I have not ever had any terrible damage to my instrument, as you sometimes see these horrible pictures show up on Facebook, of instruments smashed. But the people who have handled my cello have handled it with great care, and I'm very grateful to them for that.
Yeah, and I mean, many people will purchase a seat for their cello, right? And I think they get a bit of a discount, but still, it's a crazy amount for a cellist to travel with. Yes,
it's 50% off the full price of a ticket, which is often can be more than the discount ticket that you buy for yourself. And I unfortunately do not travel in those realms of income, unfortunately.
Now, how did you become interested in classical music?
Well, I came by it honestly. Both of my parents were musicians. My dad, for many years, was a professor of piano and music history at Brandon University, and he actually even served as dean of the School of Music for 5 years at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. And my mother was a horn player. They met at Yale, actually, at the School of Music there. They were both doing their graduate degrees. So I think it was probably kind of inevitable that I was going to find my way into music. And I bet having classical musician parents, they were made sure you had the best teachers available, I'm guessing. A lot of people, when they have their children study music, don't know how to find a teacher. So that is certainly one of the benefits. Yeah. Now, you're from Brandon. I remember when James Ennis was at the HPO, and I remember in rehearsal seeing you two hug, and I thought, wow, what's the story there? And I heard through the grapevine that you actually babysat James Ennis. Is that true? That is true. his parents were also, his father was a trumpet professor at the same school of music as my dad.
Yeah.
And they lived across the street from us in Brandon. And his mother was my ballet teacher. So it's very, I mean, the Ennises are more like family to me than acquaintances. I babysat all of the kids. Charlie is the oldest brother. He's now in the American Navy. James and their younger sister, Anne, who is, she does musical theater, but now she's more of a full-time mother down in Florida. But anyway, so yes, I was a babysitter for Jimmy, and there are some stories there.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So was becoming a professional performer the clear choice for you?
Well, I mentioned Mrs. Ennis, my ballet teacher. My original goal in life until I was about 17 was to be a professional ballet dancer. But at a certain point, I realized that I was not going to be cut out for that future, unfortunately. But I had been playing cello sort of through that whole time. And I decided that if I wasn't going to be a ballet dancer, I'd be a cellist in a ballet orchestra. So I haven't met that particular goal yet, but I have played some amazing ballet music as a member of the HPO, and that's been a real thrill for me. And we've had some dancers from time to time. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the past few seasons, we have performed so many ballet suites.
Yes.
In particular, the absolutely phenomenal early 20th century works like from Ravel and Prokofiev and Shostakovich. It's just such a thrill to hear that fantastic dance music live. Yeah.
And as exciting as that is the Stravinsky ballets, we've done the Firebird and we've done Petrushka, and those are also just tremendously exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And one of these days, I'm hoping for Rite of Spring, so that's got my fingers crossed.
Yes, exactly. That would be a treat. Now, we have a question from Instagram. Now, this is from our friend Susie Sunshine, and I'm sure, Laura, you would remember Susie Sunshine from performing on stage with the HPO at our fancy concerts.
Yeah.
So she submitted a question and said, when did you first know the cello was for you? And since you've already talked about becoming a cellist rather than a dancer, perhaps you can talk about why did you choose the cello?
Well, that is actually a good little story. I started playing cello in grade 4, which is when a lot of people start string instruments through the schools. And what they did was they had a string quartet come to the school, as now I'm a member of a string quartet that goes out to schools and plays for school children. And then after the string quartet played, we got a little form to fill out asking us which instrument we would be interested in learning. And I am very much kind of a middle of the road person. So like when I take these surveys, it's like all of the little zeros in the middle tend to be filled. So I chose the viola because it was in the middle. But they didn't have a small enough viola for me to start on because I was still a little small for the ones that they had available. So they said, well, you can play violin, and then when you get a little bigger, you can switch. So they took me down to the store on Rosser Avenue in Brandon and gave me a violin to hold. And I had it in my hand for literally less than a minute before I was like, I don't ever want to play this. Take it away. So they took me back to the school and they said, well, do you want to try a cello? And they gave me a cello and I sat down with it. And I could feel the strings vibrating under the fingers of my left hand. And I thought, that's kind of cool. I like this. Okay, I'll play this one. So that's how it happened. I was supposed to be a violist, but fate took me in a different direction.
That's interesting. Also interesting, you were supposed to be a violist because a lot of violists, of course, come from playing violin first. So
yes,
it's an interesting path.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, can you tell us a little bit about your training? Once you decided to be a cellist, what happened from there?
Well, I was fortunate to be growing up in a town, Brandon, which had a really great music school already. And I had the advantage of having that resource as I was studying, even before I was concentrating on the cello. So once I decided at the age of 17 that I was going to be a cellist for sure, I practiced really hard and I auditioned and I got into the Brandon University School of Music. And I did 2 years there. And then decided that it was time to sort of leave my hometown and the safety of everything I knew there. And so I transferred to the University of Toronto. And I came to Toronto with a friend of mine who was a singer, and we found an apartment on Brunswick Avenue. And I got my undergraduate degree there. Then I decided again it was time for a change and a sort of an expansion of my horizons. So I did a year of my master's at the Manitoba School of Music in New York, which I really wanted to have the experience of living in Manhattan. And I'm so glad that I did. But at the end of the first year of my schooling at Manus, they fired my teacher, Gary Hoffman, mostly because he was so busy performing that he was almost never there. And I can understand from the point of view of most of the students that they wanted to have a cello teacher who was going to be there every week and giving lessons. But I was uncertain what to do at that point, and I decided to transfer to the University of Michigan, which is where I finished my graduate degree. And from the University of Michigan, I auditioned and got my job in the Hamilton Philharmonic, and that's that story.
Wow, right away. That's great.
I was very lucky to get a job right out of school.
Yeah. Now, apart from your teachers, have you had any mentors along the way in the business that have helped you out and been influential?
Well, I'd like to single out at this point my stand partner of nearly, actually, I think over 25 years at the Hamilton Philharmonic, Jack Mendelson, who's the recently retired principal. Mm-hmm. 25 years is longer than many marriages last. It's one of those sort of relationships that people outside the business don't always necessarily appreciate or understand. When you share a stand with somebody for that many years, it's a real complicated and rich relationship that you've been sharing music, sharing seeing music, sharing playing music. And Hamilton Philharmonic has always had a reputation for a really great cello section, and that's a tribute to him. He was a wonderful section leader, and I learned so much about leading a great section, about being a member of a great section from him, and I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to spend that time with him over the years and sort of have that experience of a relationship that lasted that long and went through all the ups and downs that the whole orchestra went through.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, Jack Mendelson has such a fantastic sound, so powerful. I have enjoyed many solos, and you can just hear his sound just project. And then, as you say, I mean, just such a great section leader too, how everybody would fall in with that. I can see that his sound would have been very inspirational too. So that's fantastic. Now, you mentioned that, the changes of the orchestra. You have been here since 1989. Can you talk a little bit about what it has been to be part of the HPO for so long?
It's been a journey. There have been a lot of dark times with this orchestra. People know probably best about the time that we went under in the late 90s, and the travails that we went through at that time. And having reformed after we folded, artistically, it took a long time for us to find our feet again. It was we lost a lot of great players at that point, and it took a while for things to turn around. But since Jamie Somerville arrived, and now Gemma, it's been such a great thing to watch the artistic renaissance of this organization. We all, to a man, I think, or to a person, I should say, all of the players in this orchestra love to come to work, which is not true of every orchestra that I've played with. And I freelance around the region, and even in the HPO of old, when it was a full-time orchestra, but it had its issues, personnel issues, and so forth. I don't think I've been in another orchestra where everybody is so excited to come to work, and especially these days, because with Gemma at the helm, the halls are full. We play exciting repertoire. The audience responds, and we respond. It's this great feedback loop of just sort of tremendous excitement, and to see it go from the darkest time, from folding for lack of money and community support, to now with full halls and just so many satisfying concerts. It's just really, I'm a little bit speechless, as you can see. It's just so satisfying.
Yeah, yeah. And I think part of the transformation too has been through the artistic administration team over the years. I mean, I've been involved since 2012, and the community growth has just been staggering. I mean, I mentioned earlier that you're part of our community team out there doing things. I am as well. It's so great to be able to see people in the community, talk with them at these smaller events, give them a chance to get to know us a little bit, and then have them join us in the concert hall for the full concerts. So I feel like the organization is reaching out in so many ways, and then we all come together at the concerts, and it's such an uplifting moment and spirit of it. So yeah. Brilliant. I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is a question of, like, it's not just the players on stage in Gemma, it's not just the artistic team, but it is a tremendous team in the office and in the administration. We have been fortunate just in the last 6 or 7 years, I think, to have drawn some tremendous talent administratively in this organization, and I hope to see that continue as well. It's all of the pieces are there now, as I say, and we have a wonderful board as well. They're super engaged. They are always asking questions and thinking ahead, and just so committed to the process. So it's the whole picture. We have the whole package. We're very, very lucky.
Yeah, and you mentioned the board too. They are just so supportive, and you know, at all of the concerts, just so engaged with us. It's not just something they do; it's something they live with us. So we really appreciate them.
Yeah.
Now on to the next question for you. What other musical activities do you have besides playing in the HPO? I think you're quite busy.
Well, it's a little bit sad, actually. I'm not as busy as I used to be. I would like to say I'm in a bit of a transition period. I played with the Windermere String Quartet on period instruments. We had a 14-year run of 4 concerts per year. But this is the first season where we have not done that. We concluded our concert series at the end of last spring. We may have some activities, sort of one-off activities coming in the future, but we haven't sort of made any plans, and this whole pandemic situation has put a wrench in making plans, as we all know. So that's a little bit of a gaping hole in my musical activities, but we do still have 2 CDs that are available for purchase. I'm not sure exactly where those are available, and I should figure that out. I should have figured that out before I came on today. But the other thing that kept me busy for many years is playing with the Talisker Players Chamber Music Series, which came to an end 2 years ago. And that was, we played chamber music with singers and played so much interesting repertoire with that. And out of that has arisen a thing which I still do, which is I arranged these evenings of Broadway and American standard songs for string quartet and singers. So I've done Noel Coward, I've done Cole Porter, I've done Irving Berlin, I've done the Gershwins, I've done Sondheim and Bernstein, and some other things. And once the Talisker Players Chamber Music wrapped up, that project was picked up by a festival that I do in Brandon every August called August Fest Homecoming Festival, which is a festival of performers. It's like a 5-concert festival each August, all of the performers either went to school at Brandon University or came from that region of southwestern Manitoba. And we have a bunch of great singers who've come from Brandon. Hugh Russell, who lives in Chicago and sings with the Lyric Opera there sometimes and concertizes. Jamie McLennan, who lives in Winnipeg and concertizes and performs with Manitoba Opera. Doug McNaughton also sings in opera across the country. So we have that occurs every year. And this year I'm working on a show called Broadway Meets Hollywood. So that arranging project continues, even though the Talisker Chamber Music is no longer going.
Right, right. By the way, our HPO team posted where people can find your Windermere quartet recording.
Right.
They're really on top of it here.
Much more organized than I am.
That's interesting. You've done so much arranging, and I'm happy to know that that material is out there. I love string quartet and string arrangements by string players because they're so idiomatic, right? They really have interesting textures and use techniques just for string players. So I think those are the best. And whenever I hear something I like that, I learn from it myself as a composer.
Well, I was drawn originally to arranging because I found myself playing a lot of arrangements that were not idiomatic for string players, and I was like, I think I can do better. Yeah. Anyway, so I now have quite a catalog of these arrangements of show songs for string quartet and singers. And when I get myself organized, I will probably try to make them available to the public so that other people can perform them.
Yeah, well, it sounds fun.
Gotten around to that yet.
Now, speaking of chamber music, we have another question for you here. This is from our survey. And John asks, do you have any advice for amateur players performing in small ensembles or string quartets?
I get it's hard to frame advice. If you have a string quartet as a group of amateur musicians, that's terrific. I'm thrilled. I think that is one of the most satisfying things that amateur musicians can do is make music together. It's terribly difficult at this time because we're not. I mean, a string quartet is technically a small enough group to fall into the emergency guidelines, but it does mean leaving your house, and you can't really physically distance appropriately in a string quartet. So everything is kind of on hiatus. But people are putting these things together where you have like assemble all the sort of constituent parts and then you can play together over the internet. I don't know. That's another thing that I plan to explore. I haven't quite gotten around to it yet. Elizabeth Lowen Andrews' brother-in-law was the one who was responsible for putting together that 𝘓𝘰𝘤𝘩𝘦 that we did. So I don't know. I don't have any advice along those lines.
Perhaps advice not at this time, but perhaps some rehearsal advice. How do you rehearse really well in a string quartet? As an amateur string quartet too.
Yeah, I mean, in any string quartet, the secret is to be collaborative and supportive, I think. It's because in a string quartet, everybody is contributing musical ideas and suggestions and making requests. The potential exists for conflict, but it's always important to remember that the final goal is to end up friends and end up making this music collectively in a very collegial way. So when I was playing in the string quartet, I always, before I made a suggestion, I said it to myself in my head and tried to imagine how I would feel if I was receiving it, to make sure that I was couching it in the kind of language that is supportive and encouraging and not criticizing. That's one piece of advice. Another piece, I mean, in terms of practical rehearsal techniques, get a really loud metronome, play things in pairs, and let other people listen so that you can get feedback on how things are going together. It's hard to give specific advice without knowing more about what issues he's having. So, but those are a few things gleaned from my experience.
That's good, thank you. And on the subject of amateur music making, I'd like to point out that this Saturday, May 2nd, we are still sort of having our HPO annual community recital. So usually this happens at St. Paul's United Church in Dundas. And this time, though, it's going virtual. So we have some submissions already, and this will all be going live on our YouTube channel Saturday evening, May 2nd at 7 p.m. And you can still submit until tomorrow afternoon. So for all of you amateur music makers out there, please do it. We would love to have you make a video of you performing something, and you can upload this on our website under Community Recital. And for those of you that would like to watch, please join us for that. So we'll provide a link as well for our community recital this weekend. I'd just like to point out a couple of things here. Oh, yes, we have this on the screen. Robert Fraser, greetings from a fellow Manitoban and colleague in the Victoria Symphony. That's fun. And
Robert Fraser is not only a colleague and a fellow Brandonite, but he is I'm president, I believe, at the moment of the Organization of Canadian Symphony Musicians. So he is being a little bit modest and shy, but he's great. Love Robert.
Great. Neil Spalding, who was our guest last week, said also, wow, Laura, it's awesome to hear about all the different things you do. Isn't that great? So speaking of what you're doing right now, let's talk about that. What are you up to these days in this time of isolation?
Well, I am particularly fortunate because I live alone, and thanks to the HPO and the government, I am meeting my rent and my obligations, so I'm not sort of chewing my nails wondering where the next meal is coming from. So it means I have a lot of time to practice. I started a pauper etude group. It's a private Facebook group where we practice a pauper etude a day, and then we share a little bit just in our group for accountability, but it's turned out really great for me. We have 6 etudes left of the 40, which is, it feels like a real accomplishment. So that is one thing that I do. I read a lot of news. Unfortunately, that's almost a full-time activity. I play with my cat. She's here. I work out. I have just in September, a little gym opened up a few doors down the street from me called Soul Fuel. And I joined because it was close, and I knew because it was that close I would get to it. And they have gone virtual online. So I do 4 gym classes a week with Soul Fuel, and I can't recommend it enough. The Melissa Jane Shaw, the woman who runs it, is just tremendous motivator, and I have been really enjoying that. And standing in line for groceries and at the wine store, and that's like everybody else.
Yep. Now, speaking of recommendations, we're taking this time to give a shout out to some of our favorite Hamilton restaurants. So do you have any suggestions? Where do you like to go between rehearsals or before the show?
Well, so Jackson Square being right across the hall, street from the hall, most musicians kind of gravitate there, and I often find myself at Nations there, or in the farmer's market. There's great places to eat in the farmer's market. Relay Coffee is a place where a lot of HPO musicians get their fix. In fact, I think Relay Coffee has a benefit card, or you can get some kind of a discount if you with Relay Coffee if you have an HPO benefit card.
Yes, that's right. That's called the Momentum card, and yes, you get a discount for those subscribers.
Yes.
Now, we have a question for you online from Melanie Ayres, and this comes into the hobby section here. Do you still dance?
I have been on a bit of a hiatus from dancing. I did flamenco dancing quite steadily for about 11 years. And then last year, for whatever reason, I just kind of lost my motivation. And so I have been on a hiatus from it, but I do hope to go back. But in the meantime, I'm doing my Soul Fuel workouts. So just to try to keep myself moving, keep myself in shape, so that when I do go back, I have the stamina.
And I understand you've done some flamenco dancing in the past?
Yeah.
That's fun.
yeah. It's really great. I will give a shout out to my flamenco studio, 𝘓𝘰𝘤𝘩𝘦𝘳. Pardon me. It's one of those things, I kind of pulled it out of a hat when I was curious about trying flamenco, and oh, pardon me. My throat is dry. The teacher there, Valerie Scanura, it was just, I felt like I totally chose correctly. She's wonderful. And her daughter, Angelica, is also a great teacher and a great dancer. So 𝘓𝘰𝘤𝘩𝘦𝘳, they've been a big part of my life over the last few years. Although not currently.
Right, yeah. By the way, Melanie Ayres, who asked that question, is second bassoonist in the HPO, for those of you that don't know. And now we have another comment here from another musician, a violinist, Kate Unrau, who says, don't forget the many Bentan pre-concert dinners.
Yes, Kate and I are regulars at Bentan, as Neil is. I think that is definitely one of the top HPO player spots.
Right.
And that strip down Upper James, actually, or James North, has so many great places. Bentham and that chocolate place, Chocolat, I think it's called. The Red Bar is there. I can't remember the name of the brew pub. The Mexican restaurant farther down. You cannot go wrong just like heading north on James from Jackson Square.
Yeah.
So
all good.
Yes.
Now, the last question for you today, unless we have any other questions from our watchers, if so, ask them now. My last question for you is, I wonder, what is the music you love?
There's little music that I don't love. That's not the way to answer the question. There are whole categories. There's the music that I learned to love because my dad's a pianist and he practiced Chopin etudes. The very first classical record that I bought was Maurizio Pollini playing the Chopin etudes, actually. I love cello music, the Dvorak concerto, so many great cello concertos. I love ballet music because, you know what, that's my little alter ego, the frustrated dancer in the background. So all of those great Tchaikovsky ballets and Stravinsky and Prokofiev. I love orchestral music. I love playing Mahler symphonies and Brahms symphonies and Beethoven symphonies. I love chamber music. With the Windermere Quartet, I had the great privilege of playing all of the Beethoven string quartets. That was a very, very exciting moment when I finally got around to playing 130, which was the last one that I had not yet played. It's hard. I can't say there's one type of music I love. I love Queen, you know, I love to blast out Bohemian Rhapsody in the car. So it's a broad range.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Just one follow-up comment here. Kate pointed out the brew pub, Merit Brewing.
Ah, thank you.
There you go.
Yes.
And I haven't gone, but I will. I should.
I recommend it. Yeah, it's
okay.
Definitely worth a visit.
And we have another question for you here. This is from Vivian, and Vivian asks, do you practice every day?
Since I started the Popper Etude group, I do practice every day. We skipped one day, which was Easter Sunday, by consensus of the group. But yeah, I've been good.
All right.
I have the thumb callus to prove it.
Thank you. Well, I think that's it for our questions. So thank you so much, Laura. Oh, we have one more comment here. Thank you, Abigail and Laura, for your program today. We very much enjoyed having the string quartet out to our school in March. Waterdown District High School has also enjoyed having Abigail out to do pre-concert talks before main stage concerts. I've encouraged our students to tune in each week to stay connected with the HPO. That's great. Waterdown is our adopted school, our adopted secondary school this year. So it's nice to maintain a connection with them in this time. So thank you for that.
We had a great time at that concert.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great so great to have students come to our concerts and experience that. So this is it. Thank you so much, Laura, for this very thoughtful performance you gave earlier in this program and for this great interview. So thank you for that. You can join us next week. We are going to be here Wednesdays at noon for our Get to Know the HPO program. And following the day of this live version, it will be up on our website, hpo.org, under HPO at Home. And also, you can find there a lot of great resources to keep you in touch with the arts during this time. So our guest next week is Lance Ouellette. He is Associate Concertmaster of the HPO. And if you have a question for Lance, you can ask it on our survey. We're actually opening up our survey now. So we'll post a link to that, and we will hope to see you next week, Wednesday at noon. So goodbye, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And thank you once again, Laura.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Wash your hands.